It's a superhero project that is not Marvel or DC. Netflix re enters the superhero chat with The Old Guard.
Who are you? You can call me Andy. I lead a group of soldiers. Fighters, like you. With an extremely rare skill set.
What do you mean?
Mother? Let's just say we're very hard to kill. You've got questions, kid. You want answers? I have the new one.
And?
I think she has potential. See, you're already healing faster. You're gonna do great.
This is the Superhero Pantheon. On this podcast, we take one superhero film a week and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the pile of shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover the show and the great work that the folks at the real world are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you can do so by following us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week is Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain as always. Brian, we are going to be talking about a project that is just about a year old. Again, there are no more rules because of the pandemic, so I really wanted to watch this again, and doing this limited edition in March was a good opportunity because we are going to be taking the summer off from the podcast. So I did want to make sure that we talked about this movie, Brian, because I'm not sure what you think of this one. I know that I like this movie a lot in some cases, but there are some definite flaws that we will get into, I'm sure. But I don't think that this score is reflective of how I feel about this movie in some cases, because I genuinely enjoy this movie a lot, and I really appreciate the performances by just about everyone. I think everybody is very good in this movie. So I hope that. So I want to say up front that there will be some critiques, but I know that for me, I still very much enjoy this movie, and I'm actually looking forward to the sequel a lot.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the original Highlander, so this had that feel to it. I enjoyed the performances a lot. I like the drama a lot, and like, of course, this idea that these are warriors that are, not invincible per se, but they do die, but they just haven't died in a long time, right? It's immortality to an extent. So that concept with Highlander, I'm for that. I was more interested in the stuff in the past because that's the stuff that I like about immortals and stuff. It's just their history and stuff like that, and like throughout time and how they place in history and stuff like that. They teased a little of that and they touched upon it and they showed some of it, but I just wish that they went more with that because I felt like that was the more interesting story to tell. And if you just like a or a multiple chapter arc kind of thing, and this is like the first chapter in like a series of movies on Netflix, I kind of wish they would have done it more chronologically because I was just more interested about the history and like where all these people came from at a certain time and how they came together. Because at the beginning we're kind of just thrown in and like what's going on, who are these characters, and then all of a sudden everything kind of starts breaking down, and then they start telling flashbacks and stuff like that. So I thought it was a good concept. I just wanted more of the past. So that's just kind of me, like, because in Highlander 1, like, I think my favorite scenes in Highlander 1 are the stuff in, like, him in the past in Scotland and him growing old with that woman and getting trained by Sean Connery. So that's the kind of stuff that I like about immortal stuff in, like, the past. Like, as much as I hated X-Men Origins Wolverine, like, I did like the first 2 minutes where he showed his history in the opening credits, because that's kind of what I'm fascinated with. So they touched on that, but I love the drama scenes in this movie. and I love the performances because they just kind of bring that, because being immortal, it's got to be one of the most toughest things, man. Because like seeing everyone around you die, and that's kind of the thing that they touched on and the themes that they touched on. And I like the themes that they touched on based on being immortal and being around forever. And some have it better than others. Some found the love of their life, and some have been lonely for hundreds of years, and you can kind of tell. So I love those different aspects of what immortality can bring to certain characters, and they really played that spectrum with the various characters. It just takes a while to get to know them in this movie.
I would agree. I think this movie gets off to a bit of a slow start. I think once we get into I think everything after the airplane scene, it just feels like that's when the movie starts to click, and we'll get into that airplane scene in just a couple minutes. But this is a movie that did have a $70 million budget, which is it's sizable, but it's certainly not what you would expect out of a Marvel or DC project. But this marks the very first time, Brian, that a black woman has directed a big budget comic book movie adaptation. And in the year 2020, where we were supposed to get basically all of the major superhero releases were supposed to have been directed by women. It's really unfortunate that we did not get the opportunity to kind of assess all of them in this in the year of 2020. Obviously, a lot worse things have happened, but it's just definitely one thing we've lost. The person who directed this movie is Gina Prince Bythewood. She is perhaps best known for the 2000 movie Love and Basketball, and if you look at the rest of her filmography up to this movie, Brian, you just realized just how sexist and probably racist Hollywood is, because she did not get a lot of opportunities after Love and Basketball. And Brian, I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but it's a real good one, and she is the type of person who should have been getting more opportunities. But it's good that she did get a chance to direct this movie, and I believe that she is directing the sequel. So that makes me happy.
Yeah, it's just kind of that long gap in between, right? It's kind of unfortunate because she seems like she's really capable of directing big budget, high action, octane movies. So it's just unfortunate that it took so long to get this chance. But yeah, I haven't seen Love and Basketball. I've heard great things about that movie, so I was kind of like, wow. Because when I read her IMDb, I was like, oh, that's kind of like a big jump from like Love and Basketball to this. But then you look at the drama scenes in this movie, and it makes sense because the drama scenes are the best part of this movie. Like the actual human emotions and like all that kind of thing going on. That's the best part of this movie, and that's probably where she excels, and that's probably why they picked her, because they really wanted to emphasize those scenes in particular. And I think that's what she did her best job in that.
So this is coming from a graphic novel that this movie is based off of. It is a graphic novel that had an original run of 5 issues and a sequel series. So there are going to be additional ones that get published. This was collected into 2 trade paperbacks as of 2020. And of course, there is going to be a movie sequel. There is already one that is in the pipeline with signed contracts for all the main characters. And that makes me very, very happy. So the 2 big stars of this movie, basically, it's Charlize Theron, who I think we need to put some respect on her name, both for the career that she has had as an actor, but also a lot of the work that she does as a producer. I have to believe that one of the reasons that Prince Bythewood was able to get this movie is because of Charlize Theron. When Greg Rucka, who also wrote the graphic novel, wrote the first draft screenplay, Charlize Theron came on board, had a number of issues with it. I can only wonder what those issues are. They were raised in a conference call with Theron, which Rucka described as one of the worst experiences of my career. He did another rewrite, but then was fired. Theron's production company commissioned a new script from new writers, but Netflix hated that version. And eventually, the director, Gina Prince Bythewood, came on board, brought back Greg Rucka, who was able to patch up his differences with Theron. I'm very curious to know what the differences were in the screenplay. If I were to speculate, I would imagine it has to do with some of the gender things, but I don't feel comfortable necessarily, attaching my names to that, because we don't know. We don't know what the issues ultimately were. But Charlize Theron is somebody who has a lot of power, and I do have to say that I think she has done a lot of really interesting work. And movies like Long Shot and Atomic Blonde, they have not been the most successful, but I think that she has done a lot of really interesting work in her career. And in some cases, I don't think that she gets credit for it.
Yeah, I guess so. But to me, in my eyes, she's like a top level Hollywood A-list actress player. Like she's always kind of been that since I don't know, maybe like the last 10 years, she's kind of risen to that role. Um, I mean, ever since Monster, it felt like she's been on the up and up, just keeping going higher and higher and higher. And then she'll do something like Hancock or something like that, and still like get the money, but then do something else and get like a really big passion project on the side or something like that. So she knows how to balance it out. And as a producer, I think she does a great job here because like you can tell like she's really passionate about the project. She's really involved with the script, with the writing and everything. So I think that's a great to be hands on about. And we mentioned Margot Robbie before, and then Sharon Stone. So this is a great trend, and I think seeing her as a power player, it's pretty awesome to see. But I think with the script thing, I don't know. I think my speculation, and this is just me speculating, I think it's more to do with the beginning because the beginning seems to be like a scene that's kind of like built for 20 minutes into the movie, and like that's something that they played right at the beginning. You know what I mean? I think there was something with that where it's just like something about the introductions of these characters because it seemed kind of like what's going on in for the first 10, 15 minutes, right? I think that might have been it, but who knows? Because I felt like maybe they wanted to focus more on like the current timeline as opposed to focusing on flashbacks because it seemed like they wanted to show you more of the past, but budgetary reasons they had to go back to modern times.
Brian, it's also worth noting this is Charlize Theron's second time playing an immortal character whose immortality can fade. The first was in Hancock, a movie that we have been postponing talking about. A lot of it is because I really don't want to watch and talk about that movie, but it's going to happen at some point, Brian, and it's worth pointing out that Charlize Theron has done this twice.
And that was the big secret of that movie. Spoiler alert: she wasn't even advertised as a superhero in that movie when it was just Will Smith. So again, when one of those things, those things about Hollywood.
So the other actor that we are going to talk about a lot is Kiki Lane. Kiki Lane, for me, is best known for her work in If Beale Street Could Talk, which is a tremendous movie, an underrated movie from Barry Jenkins, his follow-up to Moonlight. I love that movie. You can go read my write-up about it on entertherealworld.com as it is one of my 100 favorite movies of all time, Brian, and Kiki Lane is great in that. I think she's going to be best known very soon for Coming to America, a movie that I don't like, and Kiki Lane is kind of wasted in, but I really like what she is able to do here in this movie. I love her interactions with Charlize Theron. I think the best scene in the movie is the airplane fight scene. I don't know about you, but that scene was actually the first to be shot. There was a lot of nerves because it was the first week of shooting. The characters were new, things were being adjusted, and I think they did a really great job of setting the tone for the relationship between these characters. I think the performances are great. Apparently, a lot of the stunts were actually done by these actors, and I'm sure that some of that is BS. But for me, Brian, the thing that works about this movie, the action sequences are all very good. A lot of Marvel movies come down to CGI fests, and even I think even WandaVision, as we talked about last week, kind of fell into that trap. But the thing that I love about this movie, for all of its flaws, the action sequences, it's a lot of close-ups, it's a lot of hand-to-hand fighting, it's a lot of either it's CGI that's being well hid, or what's happening on camera is actually happening. And I think that airplane scene is a very good representation because these two characters are very much trying to figure each other out. And it's kind of a mentor mentee relationship. And there's also some humor attached to it as well. I love the airplane scene. And I love Charlize Theron and Kiki Lane's interactions throughout this movie.
Yeah, their chemistry is great. There's a lot of great chemistry in this movie between actors and their relationships. But I think that airplane scene was really well done because, like you mentioned, the action sequences in this movie are very unique because they shoot it differently, and it's not so much as fast, it's so much as like they can get so much done by the actors in a single take. So it looks real. Whenever you do single takes, I think when it comes to action sequences, that's when you kind of perfect it a little more, makes it a little more crisper and smoother. Because if you have all these different cuts, it's kind of like, well, yeah, that's definitely looking fake. But when you do it in a single cut kind of thing, That's what kind of makes that flight sequence like really interesting in the way they shot it, because it's definitely a fight scene, but it's more like almost like a dance choreography because of the way it looks and it looks so smooth and the way that they were countering each other, and then because it's a narrow space, like we talk about that with Bong Joon Ho and how he can shoot narrow spaces and small spaces. She was able to do that sequence in a plane, and it looked really well done. In terms of like all those sequences, the action sequences, I think that they kind of went almost opposite John Wick, because John Wick style, and I know we call it John Wick style, but it's not officially John Wick style, but you saw it in Birds of Prey, that awesome, fast, quick cuts. This is kind of like the opposite. So I like that. And you can have different styles of action, and this is definitely one of those different styles that works for this movie. And it really works really well because there's a lot of hand-to-hand combat kind of stuff, and it really works well, I think, at the end with the end sequence fight, because that kind of just culminates everything. Because at the beginning of this movie, when they first do the action sequences, you're like, "Whoa, what the heck is going on?" And it looks really cool. Then you're starting to, and then they do more action sequences, and you see the style kind of build up and kind of like show you it's like a different action style. So I like that a lot about this movie.
So two other important actors who were in this movie are Marwan Kenzari and Luca Marinelli, as they play a couple in this movie. And as they were testing chemistry, Charlize Theron and Greg Rucka were certain that the monologue Joe delivers about Nikki not being his boyfriend would be done honestly. And according to Theron, Marwan's performance felt so guttural, it came from a deep place within him. It was undeniable. He just sold it really feeling that way. And Brian, I have to say that the airplane sequence is really great, but I think the second best sequence in this movie, and I think when people reflect on this movie and the most memorable parts, I think there are a lot of people who are going to talk about that scene specifically, because it is still very rare to have a queer couple. We've certainly had a couple of gay characters over the years, even in Deadpool 2, but to have something like this, it feels very significant. The relationship between Joe and Nikki, I wish that the characters were more individually developed, but just in that one monologue, I think I got more from their relationship than I ever do from a lot of MCU relationships, because I don't think the MCU has ever really cracked how to do a romantic relationship well, with a couple of exceptions. But even with Joe and Nikki, there's not banter. There is a genuine love and a genuine care between those two. And to have that be expressed in a superhero movie is actually one of the most surprising things, because you don't see it in almost any superhero movie.
Yeah, and their chemistry and their relationship is fantastic. Like they feel like a genuine couple. That's what I mentioned before. Like some of these characters are lucky to have found each other, and they're both immortal and they found each other. And they mentioned how they killed each other in the past, quote unquote, and just grew to love each other. And some of the other characters just kind of like saw everyone die around them. So that's why I kind of like it's kind of it's really awesome to see this relationship. But then you kind of contrast it to some of the other characters who are just kind of suffering because they are just so alone from being immortal. So I love that kind of contrast, and you can tell like this is like a really great love, like it's a deep love story that you almost want to watch as its own movie, because like they mention their history about fighting in the wars against each other from different countries over the years, and how they, like I said, they killed each other multiple times, at least they thought they did. So that's such an interesting love story within itself. That's why I wanted to see more of like this in chronological order. Like if they gave us the first movie with like Charlize Theron at the beginning, from when she was like a an Amazon or whatever it was she's supposed to be, and then you see this love story in the past, I think it would have been an epic like romantic love story. But we just didn't get to that. But at least that dialogue kind of builds, and shows that relationship. And what's great about that dialogue that he gives is that like it has this like history to it, and it's not just like the surface monologue where this is my lover and I love him and blah blah blah, and you say all those cliche things. But he went deep into their history, and that's what made it so deeply emotional in that touching moment.
So this movie came out at a time when there were almost no movies coming out in theaters. This came out in June of 2020. This was viewed by Netflix claims that it was viewed by over 70 million households, and this is regarded to be one of Netflix's most successful releases. And I'm sure that a lot of that has to do with the fact that there really were not a lot of superhero projects coming out at this time. If you think about the summer 2020, it was this and New Mutants, and that was about it. As Of course, Black Widow was postponed. Wonder Woman did not come out until December. So this kind of got a summer to marinate. And in a way, I think it played to the movie's success. I think this movie was more successful because of the fact that I think there was a thirst for superhero content. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. And I think people, because they're stuck in their homes, much more likely to give this a chance. And again, even though I don't think this movie is perfect, I'm genuinely happy that a lot of people were able to see this and that it was successful enough to get a sequel.
Yeah, I think the same thing. It just feels like because Netflix really sometimes like under promotes their movies, and I feel like they slightly under promoted this because like I didn't really hear about it till like maybe like a few weeks after it came out. And I don't really am the kind of guy that goes on Netflix and starts searching for all the new stuff. Like if I'm gonna go on Netflix, I know exactly what I'm gonna watch. I really don't browse. So like I felt like there needed to be more promotional stuff around like the city and stuff like that because you see a lot of that even with New Mutants. I saw a bunch of promotional stuff even for the limited release. So I think that's one of Netflix's problems. But because of the fact that we were so craved for stuff, and that's why something like Tiger King got super popular all of a sudden with almost no advertising, right? So I think that's kind of like Netflix's game is like it's minimal advertising, and then they get a hit like this where it's like, wow, we didn't have to spend so much on advertising, and this got 70 million people to watch it. So it was a combination of both. But I do think Netflix kind of slightly dropped the ball in promoting this movie because I felt like it could have been a bigger deal and felt like a bigger deal, but like for some reason it didn't. And for, Stranger Things gets all the love when it comes to the big promotional marketing for Netflix and stuff, but this didn't have that kind of backing to it. So maybe that's kind of why I kind of missed it when they first came out and didn't even hear about it. But overall, I think with because of those metrics and stuff like that, I think Netflix got lucky in this case because had there not been a pandemic, I think with the advertising they do, it might have just slipped under the radar even further.
Yeah, and I think I was the one who actually told you about this movie, wasn't it?
I'm pretty sure you were because like I didn't. I was just like a Netflix movie, and like how come I haven't heard about it yet? And then I remembered like Netflix doesn't really like advertise their movies that well.
They really don't, and it's unfortunate because I think this is definitely a case where they could have found a lot of success, and I think they're lucky this movie was as successful as it was. Let's get to the categories. So for the heroes, Charlize Theron is very tired. She is a grizzled Andy. She has basically lived since the beginning of existence. She seemingly wants to be done with everything, but Brian, just like in life, the moment that you realize, or there comes a moment when maybe you don't want to live anymore, but as soon as she becomes vulnerable, all of a sudden she wants to live because time has meaning again, Brian, because she is vulnerable. And I think one of the things that struck me on this rewatch is number one, how tired Charlize Theron's character Andy is, but she's really good in this role. And I think she's probably the best performance in this movie. I think Kiki Lane is also very good, but Charlize Theron, I think she nails this role right from the beginning. And any of the flaws that are a result of some of the storytelling choices and even some of the last lack of character development with other people in this movie, Charlize Theron certainly makes up for it. I think as kind of the centerpiece of this movie, I don't think you could ask for anyone better.
Yeah, and she did a hell of a job leading the way. And based on her eyes in this movie, and just like you said, she's tired, and I totally get that vibe. And that's kind of the vibe that you're supposed to have for a character that's lived forever. So just her performance made me so much more fascinated with that character and like the history of that character, because they just gave you these little teases of her history, right? And I just wanted so much more of that. Like I still want, I think I want a movie like a prequel to this movie where it's just their origin stories, man. And I swear, like I feel like that's an incredible movie to fucking venture through time in, but I don't know if they got the budget for something like that. But her performance is so great in this movie, and it's she doesn't really crack a smile too much in this movie, but she's not supposed to. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the purpose of it all, and she does a great job. And I actually think she's like the second best performance in this movie because I'm more of a fan of Matthias Schoenaerts, I think his name is, as Booker. I think Booker, man, is really like the true Dracula of this whole thing. Because like, yeah, Charlize Theron's character's tired, but Andy's tired. But like Booker just seems like the most broken man who's like an alcoholic, and he just can't seem to like, I don't know, just not be happy anymore. And the fact that like he's not as lucky as Joe and Nikki, because Joe and Nikki found each other, and they've been together for hundreds of years. He's been alone for hundreds of years, and he just can't take it anymore. So I think there's something to that performance when he has this monologue talking about how just watching people around him die, and how the Kiki Lane's Nile character, like the new girl on the team, like he's just telling her like be prepared, because like you're gonna watch all your loved ones die, and if you want, just take the time you have with them now. So I thought that was really poignant.
Yeah, I think Matthias Schoenhartz, I think he does a very good job. Again, on rewatch, I think just noticing the performances a lot more. And I do appreciate the Booker character much more on the second viewing as opposed to the first one. But I think for me, still, I think I like Kiki Lane more because of what she brings as an outsider. She is kind of the audience surrogate. Again, the banter and some of what she does with Andy's character. And the one thing I will say is that before she realizes that she is immortal, I do like the scene where she has her throat slit and just the shock of that moment, because you're not expecting this character to all of a sudden just die, and then of course she comes back, and just the reaction that some of her platoon mates give to her. They know that something is very clearly up, and just her eyes and her facial reaction, she's very good. I think what she's able to do in this movie is she's able to come off like a total badass, and they don't sexualize her. And again, I think that's one of the benefits of having a female director, is that neither Kiki Lane or Charlize Theron feel sexualized in a good way. So I really like the fact that you have these two very strong female characters that are not sexualized, but are integral to the function of the group. And I think Kiki Lane, I think her story and the fact that she is new, I think makes this more relatable, because she does have family who is still alive. The other characters, their families are long gone, but her family is still very much alive, and she probably has friends, and she has a relationship to this world. She is not jaded by being immortal for thousands of years. So I think having her character was really important. And I think, unfortunately, if you were to do a flashback movie or flashback sequences, I think you lose some of that in that way. But by having a new character, you present a new dynamic. And I really appreciated her character. And yeah, I mean, I think you couldn't go wrong with Matthias or Kiki Lane. I think those are two great performances. But for me, and part of it is because, I do know more about Kiki Lane based on other projects that I've seen her in, but just tremendously impressed by her.
Yeah, she did a great job as well, and I like her relationship with Charlize, or her chemistry, I should say, with Charlize there, and it's got that feels like a little Batman Robin kind of thing going on, and it's supposed to feel like that, so I like that dynamic, and it actually feels, well, now that I think about it, now it's actually more of like in the original Highlander with Sean Connery and I forget his name already, or Christopher Lambert, and it's got that same feeling and dynamic. So I like that a lot, and yeah, Kiki Lane like does a great job at her performance, especially like I think that scene where she's listening to the music before like the army officer calls her over, and she's kind of like in her own head. Those little moments I like in character development, because you can kind of tell like she's just really like lost, and she doesn't know how to react, and she's kind of just trying to focus it out and listen to some music. Like that's totally relatable.
So we have Joe and Nikki, played by Marwan Kenzari and Luca Marinelli. We've had a chance to talk about them already. It's unfortunate that they don't get to be individualized enough, but a scene I really did like that involved these two characters pretty heavily is when they test out Andy's knowledge of baklava. I really appreciated that, because you have to believe that as immortals, you learn to know different tastes so well. I really like that scene as just kind of a hangout moment. It reminded me a little bit of the scene in Ultron when all the Avengers are trying to lift Thor's hammer. I got some of those vibes, and Nikki and Joe are an important part of that sequence.
Yeah, I definitely got that vibe too, and I was laughing a lot at that point because I was like, "What is going on?" Like, And then I realized, like, oh, she's probably like identifying each ingredient in the freaking thing, and she does it with 100% accuracy. So I thought that was a little nice detail that only like a movie like this can have because of immortal characters. So overall, I think everyone did a great job. Oh wait, I forgot. We got one more note here. Chiwetel Ejiofor as I guess he's a bad guy at the beginning that turns babyface halfway through. Is that what we're gonna go with?
Yeah, I put it as a question mark. I'm going to put him under the hero category because he basically, I mean, he's a hero whether he likes it or not. What's really fascinating to me, Brian, is this is basically the reverse of Doctor Strange. In Doctor Strange, he starts off as good and turns bad, and in this movie, he turns bad and becomes good. So it's fascinating to see what Chiwetel Ejiofor is doing in these various superhero movies. He's someone that doesn't get cast enough, and it was great to see him in this movie. He is very good. I'm giving this a 7.
I'm gonna go with an 8 because like I feel like the performances are just so strong, and even though some of the character development is lacking in some of the characters, and not not all of them, but I feel like the performances are just so strong that it makes up for that. And Chiwetel Ejiofor plays a character. He's not immortal, just so everyone knows. He's a guy that kind of realizes the existence of these people and kind of does the whole, like conspiracy theory board thing and connects the dots to all their historical past and stuff like that to the point where they start to realize that the fact that they saved these people throughout time because they were warriors, that it leads to this chain of events where these people that they saved generations later, their ancestors of the people they saved turned out to like, come up with like cures for certain diseases or like, come up with certain like, medical advances or something like that, where it's like it influences the world in a positive way. So he's the one that kind of figured out all these different connections and kind of reinvigorates them into motivating them into like, wow, what we've been doing the last thousands of years, because they're all tired of like being warriors and mercenaries. That the work they have been doing has been for something. So I thought that was a really cool moment overall, and I thought him kind of revealing that moment showed that he was a babyface or a good guy, even though he was joining up with the bad guys at the beginning. But it just seemed like he joined up with the bad guys just to draw the immortals out.
I wish the villains were as well developed. We do get Harry Melling as Merrick. Harry Melling was in a number of 2020 releases, and it kind of threw me off because, of course, he was the Dursley child in Harry Potter, and he's lost some weight, and he's probably the biggest star coming out of that movie. He is the typical evil tech bro, but he really leans into the performance, and anything good about Merrick comes from his performance. It's not the character. It's very much kind of this cliche. So I'm putting Veronica Nago as Quinn. Brian, I assume that you have not seen the movie Fury, the 2019 Vietnamese movie.
No, no, I haven't.
Basically, it is a Vietnamese version of Taken, and I believe that it is streaming on Netflix as well. Take 2 hours out of your life to watch this movie. It's really good, and I think you're going to be really impressed with her performance specifically. Now, Veronica Nago has also been in Defy Bloods. She played Hanoi. I forget the character's name, but she was in Defy Bloods in a small role. She was also in The Last Jedi. She plays Rose's sister at the very beginning. That is probably what you know her best as, Brian.
That I do remember, yes. And it's weird that they set this character up, and it's obviously she's the setup for this as the villain for the sequel. But I don't know, man. I felt like she kind of comes off as like a big time hero that kind of got screwed over. But again, that's usually the villain origin story as it is, right?
I mean, I think the idea is that basically she is very bitter over the fact that she was forced to drown over and over again for literally hundreds of years, and she is going to be back to battle the Old Guard. I mean, basically, the idea is that the Old Guard broke their promise to find her. And Brian, I have to say, if I was drowned over and over again for 500 years, I'd probably lose my mind too.
See, the thing is, to my understanding, is that she did try to find her, but she couldn't, right?
Brian, when you're drowning over and over again, do you really care? Do you really notice that?
I feel bad because, like, you can tell Andy, really still loves and cares about Quinn, but like, it was not her fault. She was taken by the people and thrown overboard, and I guess at that point you just can't find her. But you would think that she would have just landed because of the weight of everything in the same spot and not move. And I don't know. Maybe she did find her, and she just still didn't take her out of the water, and that's going to be the big twist in the second one.
Yeah, man, I don't know. I have a real I had some difficulty with this character, and on the rewatch, a little bit is teased out. I think it is teased out a little bit better, but the villains in this movie are it's tough because I am excited for the sequel and what this character is going to bring to it. I do like Harry Melling's performance, but just like a lot of villains in a lot of superhero movies, a lot of it feels underbaked. I'm giving this a 6.
I'm gonna go with a 5, and yeah, Merrick is. I guess he's supposed to be the modern age, young tech junkie kid. Like a Zuckerberg kind of type. You know what I mean? A little socially awkward, but he's a rich tech billionaire kind of guy, and I get that. I wish they kind of just established that a little more because they just introduced him as Merrick, and all of a sudden he's just kind of running the show, and you don't really get a background to him, and it just came off cliche, and that's kind of unfortunate.
All right, let's get to the story here. So for me, I love some of the themes of this movie. These immortals cannot die, but they have a fear of being caged up, which I think plays very well kind of in modern times because this is an idea that has been discussed a lot as far as what the fact that we are putting kids in cages as a country. And if you're immortal, there's nothing more horrifying than being captured and just thrown in and not having control of your body. So there's a lot of concern about being kidnapped, and I like the way that that theme plays throughout the movie. And it is realized in the Quinn character specifically because she is forced to drown over and over again. They are immortal people, but they're all very bitter and cynical, especially this is best represented by Andy. They are frustrated by a world that seems to be getting worse. I think we can all connect with that feeling. I think Kiki Lane as an outsider is a great audience avatar because she basically brings hope again to this group. I love that Charlize Theron is a bitter mentor, but she is also bringing a lot of gravitas to the role. I think they do a great job of having Booker be a traitor and sending him off to a century of exile. I love that idea that everyone else is meeting to talk about Booker's fate. I think this movie mostly functions well. I think it would have been nice if Joe and Nikki were established more beyond being a couple. And I also think the villains are just mustache twirly. And I think they're trying to bring in this idea of this is for the greater good. And I like that that is represented in Chiwetel Ejiofor's character of Copley because he is bringing up his wife and what these immortals can do. But Merrick is just an evil tech bro, and that's all that he is. And there is nothing beyond that, seemingly. And I think that they try to pay some cursory attention to the idea that these characters are potentially withholding themselves, but I do also like the payoff that these folks have done a lot of good in their time as well in the various wars and battles that have been fought over the years. So I appreciate the fact that they were able to incorporate some of that. And by the end of this movie, the Old Guard, that they are going to be this. I don't want to say they're kind of going for kind of a combination X-Men, Batman vibe, and Copley is kind of a Alfred, Bruce Wayne, Professor Xavier kind of amalgamation. So there is a lot to the story, some of which is good, some of it which doesn't totally work. I almost appreciate the fact that this movie does not explain why the immortals stop being immortal and it's just something that happens. Like, I actually think it's nice that a movie doesn't feel the urge to explain everything because I feel like we've gotten obsessed with that.
Well, to me, it makes sense because there's no way of knowing what's going on, right? If there's no answer, and you just keep meeting other people, and you just have the recurring dreams about meeting other people, and then you meet them up, you kind of have to establish your own rules about your own immortality, right? So that's kind of what they end up doing is kind of establishing their own rules because they really don't know what's going on. We don't know if this is a gift from God. We don't know if they're like aliens. They don't explain any of that, which is great. It's fine because it just adds more to the mystery and the drama of it all. Like, am I a chosen one kind of thing going on? So I think it really kind of adds to it and makes the characters more unique and special for being chosen for that. So it kind of all makes sense to me as to why there's no explanation for it. But to me, like some of the things that were kind of weird is like, well, some of these people start losing their powers, and some of them just die. Like we see a flashback of another immortal dying in Charlize Theron's arms, and then all of a sudden, Andy starts not be able to regenerate for some reason. and they really don't explain that. And then all of a sudden she starts healing again. So I don't know if she was just like losing her will to live and not healing fast enough, and that was the implication of it. But I think they didn't really tie that end or loose end really well because it just felt like, wait, so she can heal again? So she wasn't healing before? Did she not care? I thought they can't control that. So there was a lot of that kind of added more questions to it. So that kind of was like,
As far as Andy's character,
yeah, because remember she's like healing, or she stops healing, and then she starts healing again with no real explanation as to why.
I think the implication is that she is not that she is healing like a normal regular person at the end of the movie, but that she is no longer immortal because it's even alluded to in her conversation with Booker about the fact that he says that he won't ever see her again, and she says for him basically to have hope that she'll still be there in 100 years because I guess she can't die of old age, but she can still be. The implication to me is that she is not healed at the end of the.
Really? Okay. That's another take. That's interesting because I was under the impression that she just lost the will to heal, and then like Kiki Lane just kind of came in and gave her that spark back. So it's up for interpretation, but
I mean, because they were still protecting her at the in the final battle sequence. They went out of their way to make sure she didn't get shot or axed or anything like that. By the way, when Charlize Theron got that axe and started killing fools, that was great.
yeah, that was the thing too. Is like each individual person has their like individualized weapon, and I want like a history of that weapon, but you know they didn't give us that. But I thought that was really cool because I see the axe in the back of her and her back, and it's just like okay, there's a story there. There's definitely a story there. But yeah, that was one of the things with me is like I couldn't figure out the whole healing thing at the end for Andy. But other than that, I like the story a lot. It's just the mustache twirling villain you mentioned. The fact that I kind of wish they revealed the twist about them having an influence on the world a little earlier. Because I felt like I don't know that's kind of like you know the team that they built at the end is kind of like the team I wanted to see in the beginning of this movie. Like I wanted to see Copley as a helper at the beginning, but I get it. That's the story they wanted to tell to establish them as a team by the end of the movie. So I get it. Overall, I'm gonna go with a seven. I almost went with a six, but like I think overall, like I love a lot of the elements of this. It reminds me of Highlander a lot, and it made me want it more. And I think that's what you want out of a movie. So I think it did a good job in that sense.
I'm giving this the same score. I liked a lot of the story, and I think this is a movie that for me, I think with a couple of I think with a better script and maybe some more colors, I would have been more willing to consider this for the Pantheon. But from a technical standpoint, I think this is one of the weakest parts of the movie. There is a very muted color scheme. It's a lot of warehouses, a lot of empty spaces. I think the pacing of the movie is very good. The movie's about 2 hours without credits. I do think that it functions very well and is pretty well paced once you get past the in media res opening, because of course this movie has to start one place and then flash back. That's something movies and TV shows desperately need to stop doing. I do love the hand-to-hand action sequences. The minimal use of CGI makes this feel more tactile than a lot of other superhero movies. But Brian, this is your chance to rant about colors. I'm giving this a 6.
Yeah, that was the unfortunate thing too, and you hit it right on the money, man. Because you know me, I love bright, more of the brighter colors, kind of like the high contrast kind of thing. This was very like down and dirty and gritty. Like I know it's a weird comparison, but it made me think of the Hurt Locker, and I know Hurt Locker is like a good movie, but it's not one of my top movies, and I enjoyed the high stakes drama of like the bomb defusing and stuff, but the look of the movie overall is not that great, and it's very dirty and bland and boring. And this has got kind of the same thing going on. And their costumes, I thought they could have done a better job. And even though they're all wearing black and stuff, and Charlize Theron has the dark black hair like her character, um, I don't know because I look at the panels of the comic, and the comic actually emphasizes the background where it's like they'll put these characters all dressed in black with like a bright blue background or a bright pink background to kind of give you that comic book style flash. You know what I mean? Like this didn't really have that, but it had great action sequences to kind of make up for that. So it's kind of a give and take. And then the soundtrack is not that great in this movie. I felt like the quote unquote needle drops, music cues were not that great. It felt like she was going for like a modern, hip hop kind of feel, rap, but I felt like it didn't kind of match the tone of this movie, and it didn't make those needle drops as effective as they could. But like I said, the action sequences were like the strength of this movie. It feels like the pacing was very good. The only thing I could kind of tell is like they were almost running out of money. I could think because based on the budget and like some of the flashbacks and some of the way it was shot, it felt like they kind of ran out of money by the end of the movie. But they did make up for it because the hand to hand combat is just so good. And one of my favorite things that I got technically out of this was when Nikki gets shot in the head and fucking he has to wait to heal, but the back of his head when he stands up is like the most grotesque looking thing because he got shot in the back of the head and it's healing and it's disgusting and gross. But that's one of the visuals from this movie that will stick in my head is the back of his head being covered in blood because he just got shot and he just healed it up. So overall, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I just felt like because of the colors and the music, it didn't, at least the action sequences were good, but it didn't, put it over the top as it could to a 7 or 8 just because it was just so kind of lacking in those two areas.
I did like some of the needle drops. I think I'm a little more mixed on it than you are. I think there are a couple of songs that worked, but I think there were a couple of them that, of course, were very obvious because that's what some superhero movies do. It was not Suicide Squad levels of bad. I think, for me, Brian, Suicide Squad is the measuring stick for bad needle drops. That is an all time Pantheon level bad. This movie is probably like a 4 on that scale.
Yeah, I would say that because sometimes even though they're popular songs, it just doesn't fit, and it just kind of seems kind of obvious what you're going for. I like the Tarantino style where he brings in some new stuff and some old stuff and kind of recreates or takes something old and makes it hip and new, kind of thing, mixed with like an original score. So that's kind of my idea of like a good soundtrack. Is just like not, it doesn't necessarily mean the song or it's a cool song, but it's got to fit the mood. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I'm also going with the 6 on the technical score. From a legacy standpoint, it's hard to assess the legacy of a Netflix movie. We don't know the ratings, we don't know the box office, but the fact that there is going to be a sequel and the fact that there was a lot of discussion about this movie online and social media and podcasts, I think this movie is very popular. I think for those reasons. I love the fact that this portrays a long term same sex couple. That's something you don't see in a lot of these movies. I appreciate the fact that it is getting a sequel. And I, Brian, am very much anticipating Veronica Nagol's character being the villain of the sequel. I had a hard time with this score. I'm giving it a 6.
I'm gonna go with a 5 only because it's what I mentioned before with Netflix and their advertising and like it feels like this was a big opportunity to have a big summer release and they just didn't do it like that. And it feels like Amazon's throwing all this money out for coming to America too because I see advertisements all over the place for that. And like I know that it came out, you know what I mean? Old Guard I didn't know even came out until you told me about it. So I think that's kind of an issue. And I feel like Netflix got really lucky that the metrics kind of just played well and people were searching and then the word of mouth got out and you got your 70 million. But yeah, I just feel like they kind of didn't do it justice by like having a really memorable poster. There's like I don't even picture a poster of this movie in my head, which is not really a good thing, I think, because at least every single movie we reviewed, I've had the poster image in my head. This one doesn't really have one in my head. It's just like the image of Charlize Theron, and I just press play on Netflix, and that was what I went with. So it's kind of unfortunate, but again, it's hard to measure because like it's Netflix, and they kind of keep things secretive and things like that. But I mean, 70 million, if that is true, I mean that's a lot. So you got to give credit for that. But unfortunately, I think it just kind of went under the radar, and then it's one of those things where we'll see people remember it a year from now because it might get further under the Netflix rug because there's a bunch of Netflix movies that have come out that still people have not even heard of and just kind of get swept under the rug.
I just looked up the poster for this movie. It is very generic, so that is totally fair. My total score is a 32, and yours?
31, so we're about the same level.
So a 63, so this does not crack either the Pantheon, but it is definitely not Pile of Shame worthy. And all I can say, Brian, is I'm very much looking forward to the sequel and hope that it rectifies some of these issues. But right now, we'll address what we want out of a potential sequel in one of the burning questions. First, though, we're all Charlize Theron's mood in this movie right now, yes?
I mean, at least 80%. I try to be a positive person and try to find the positive outlook in life and things. So I'll say 20% positive and 80% Charlize Theron.
On the Charlize Theron scale, I'm probably at a 6 or a 7. That's probably about where I'm at with everything going on. What one change would you have made to make this movie better, Brian? I think the biggest thing that I wanted more of is I wanted a better sense of the villains, and even more so than the color scheme, even more so than some of the flashbacks. I really would have liked the villains to have had more to do and to have a little bit more pathos attached to whatever they're doing, because it just feels like Malik and even even Copley, we don't get a greater sense of them as people, and it's just a lot of mustache twirling, and I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, with Merrick, I feel like they should have done more background as to why he really wants to find cures for cancers and all that kind of thing. Obviously, it's the money thing, but if you were to reveal that his parents died of some crazy disease or something like that, then obviously he's motivated. But they didn't really do that. They kind of made him generic. So yeah, the thing that I want more of obviously is more flashbacks. I love historical flashbacks with immortals, and I think that's pretty much what the Highlander show on USA Network in the '90s turned out to be. Because like I remember watching a few episodes as a kid and be like, oh, like this takes place in this area, you know what I mean? And I wasn't really a big Highlander fan, but I like the idea of immortals traveling through time or exploring their history, and I'm really into that. So that's kind of what I want. I probably would have had 20 more minutes of just them in the past, just to add on to it. But again, $70 million, that probably takes us another 20 million, 30 million. So I get it.
Would this have been better as a miniseries? I know my view is no. I'm glad that these are movies, mostly because I'm tired of miniseries and limited shows, especially Netflix dramas. Brian, I have to tell you, there needs to be more quality control on some of them with episode length, number of episodes. I am very glad these are movies, but I'm curious to know what you think.
At first, I was gonna say yes, but then I was like, you know what? I don't think there's enough material to stuff it to like series length. It's like because the stuff that I wanted is just another maybe hour of footage, right? That's not necessarily a whole series of episodes, right? So, um, yeah, I can dig a series of movies on this. Maybe like straight to Netflix series of movies, Netflix exclusive makes sense to me. Like as a mini series, I feel like you'll end up in I don't know, like in the stand territory, we're just kind of like just kind of stretching things out. You know what I mean? So we don't want to get to that point. Like Watchmen was limited; it had its story to tell. WandaVision was limited and had its story to tell. This has even a little less story to tell, so I think a mini series would have been too much. But just give me some good flashbacks in the next one, and maybe even more flashbacks because I love my historicals.
When it comes to question number 4, what would you like to see out of a potential sequel? I am assuming that you want more flashbacks. I think that would be very helpful, especially if you are reintroducing Quinn into the dynamic. In that case, I think bringing more flashbacks wouldn't be appropriate. I am hopeful that we get a lot of similar action sequences. I am hoping that we could get more color into this movie as well.
Definitely on the technical side, brighter colors. I actually want more Copley. Like I got this vibe by the end of the movie, like he felt like he should have been a more important character because of the revelation and the fact that he revealed all this stuff to him and that he's like a fan. He's almost like a fanboy of them, pretty much. That kind of turned into this like obsessive thing that where he works for him now. So I want to see more of Copley, man, because I think there's more to that character, and I felt like Chiwetel Ejiofor is such a great actor that he kind of got not shortchanged in this movie, but like it could have gone to a different actor and the effect of the movie would have still been the same. But when you put a Chiwetel Ejiofor in your movie, man, I feel like you got to give him a little more to do. So hopefully he's got more to do in the next one.
And finally, Brian, how is Harry Melling the biggest star coming out of the Harry Potter films?
I don't know, man. Daniel Radcliffe went on this thing where he just doesn't want to do big movies, and I respect that, man. He just wants to play movies where he's a corpse farting or something like that, or I don't know. And then
Random TBS television show. I respect the hustle. Emma Watson sounds like she's kind of going into pseudo retirement because she has a lot of money, and I guess her boyfriend slash fiance slash potential husband has a lot of money. And the actor whose name escapes me, who played Ron Weasley, is just in that weird Apple show that M. Night Shyamalan directed a couple episodes of.
the Malfoy kid, he was on that season of Flash, but he just disappeared after one season. So yeah,
And J.K. Rowling doesn't exist anymore.
yeah, all that stuff combined, and yeah, I guess out of the original run, is he the biggest star? I guess I don't know, but we'll see what happens when Daniel Radcliffe gets called back to do the cursed child or whatever, so that might bring him back to star power. But uh, it's just crazy that he lost all the weight. I respect that. For being a big guy, totally respect that. And yeah, it's just crazy the transformation of his body. That's all I gotta say.
All right, Brian. Now that we have discussed Old Guard, we are going to transition into talking about the new Stan Lee book that came out about a month ago at this point. It is entitled The Rise and Fall of Stan Lee. And Brian, the one thing I will say about this book is that I really struggled with parts of it. And I struggled kind of with the first 100 pages because I really did not like the way that the book was written. And so I struggled with that. But then the ending of the book, which was extremely compelling and well written, I mean, it was a hard read because you're reading about what's happening to this man. And while I think the author of this book, Abraham Reisman, I certainly have issues with the quality of the book. I do not take issue with any of the research or any of the content. It is very clear that the way that Marvel did their business, there's a lot of controversy attached to it with good reason, and it's unfortunate that a lot of the people who deserve credit, I include Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby in particular, Jack Kirby especially, probably needs a lot more credit on the Marvel movies than he's been getting. But there is a lot to this book, and I don't necessarily want to give the whole thing away, but I certainly want to discuss this book in the big picture and review over some of our takeaways. So, Brian, what did you overall think of the book, True Believer: The Rise and Fall of Stan Lee by Abraham Reisman?
I kind of wish it wasn't an autobiography. I kind of wish it focused on his later years because, like, I've known there's other biographies of Stan Lee. They even mention and cite other Stan Lee biographies in this. So I was kind of like, well, why are you telling me all this if it's just in the other biography? I can just read that. You know what I mean? So that was kind of what I was thinking. Especially when they're going through like the history of like Stan Lee, and it kind of does a mirror kind of history of the background of comics and the comics code and its censorship and all that history from like the 30s all the way onward. But we kind of like, as comic book nerds, we kind of know some of that general stuff already. So to me, it was just kind of like fluff filler. You know what I mean? Like, get to the good stuff. Once you get to like 1980 onward, that's where it gets really interesting because, like, yeah, we know the process and the Marvel process, and it kind of mirrors like any other kind of creative process when it's starting out, right? Like back in the day, like I'm pretty sure like not everyone had the exact writing credits on a script. You know what I mean? Like there's always people contributing and not always getting credit, like writing teams. Some people get the writing credit, some people don't. It's kind of like a thing that happens in a lot of entertainment processes. So it is what it is. Like, I mean, we can even relate it to wrestling if you want to call it that. Like, you know, does Pat Patterson get the credit for booking the main event at WrestleMania 6, even though Warrior and Hogan were the ones that put on the show? You know what I mean? Even though Pat Patterson laid out the groundwork of the match, like, does he get the credit? But it's always Warrior and Hogan get the credit. So it's always going to be like that, I feel. And with comic books at the time, it was like this new frontier. So you didn't know who to give credit. You didn't even know how to credit someone. You know what I mean? Like everyone was still kind of learning the process. So I can understand like how Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko had that writing process, and Stan will get the credit because he's the face of the company and all that stuff. And I'm not mad at Stan Lee. I love Stan Lee as the character, and he seems to be a good person. He just surrounds himself with like questionable people towards the end of his life that kind of mooched off of him. But overall, I think if you, yeah, I agree. Maybe like cut the first 100 out, kind of make it more precise. And I listened to the audiobook version, and this is the first time I listened to an audiobook because it was free on Amazon. I was like, okay. And little did I know that because the author was so slow that you could speed up the sound to 1.5 speed. And I was like, oh, this is much better. This is like the speed that I read in my head. So like the first half, like I was like on a slow reading pace with this guy. But once I got to the second half and I sped it up a little bit, everything kind of like felt a little bit better and easier to process for me. And, you know, some of the information is kind of shocking, I'll be honest. But, um, you know, in terms of his finances and what he was doing, I don't think he was paying attention to a lot of his finances. But what can you do when you're just kind of out there putting yourself out there in Hollywood, trying to be somebody, you know what I mean? And all you can get are these cameos and stuff like that. Stan just wanted to be loved, I think. And that's kind of the message I think the book is sending, even though he made a lot of bad business decisions, like a ton of bad business decisions It's almost like throwing a dartboard on the wall.
Right. And I think that where I'm going to take this even further is you mentioned wrestling, and I definitely see a lot of comparison points between Stan Lee and Vince McMahon, because Vince McMahon is the type of person who the only thing that he has ever truly been successful in is wrestling, and that has only been for a limited amount of time. I mean, certainly the WWE is very successful at this point, but I don't know how much Vince McMahon has to do with the direct creative success. And at this point, Marvel is extremely successful. They are, if they were not attached to Disney, they would probably be the first or the second most important entertainment company in the world. Because they are associated with Disney, they are automatically a part of the most important entertainment conglomerate that has ever been known to man at this point. Between what Disney, with everything that Disney has, from the streaming services to the sports packages to Pixar to Star Wars, and now to have Marvel. I mean, it's remarkable. And Marvel drives so much of the box office. They drive so much of the conversation. Just think about what your Twitter feed looks like as soon as a new episode of either WandaVision and now Falcon and the Winter Soldier come out. It is very much it's a lot of Marvel, and I think that is something that is worth noting at this point, because there was a point when Marvel was very unimportant, and Stan Lee had a lot to do with how it slowly gained a kind of a threshold level of importance. But I think the reality is that he seemed to be also the type of person that was taking credit where it wasn't deserved. And the author points this out numerous times. The occasions when he perhaps took credit for creative decisions that were not necessarily his. A lot of the changing stories that he has in his life, and there are certainly what I think the biggest thing that you have to understand, and I think this is really important, not just for Stanley but for anyone else, is that people are people. They are not pure evil. They are also not purely good people as well. And I think Stanley is a very good representation of that, because there are clear examples of where Stanley is a good person, perhaps to his own detriment, the way that he treats his wife and his daughter. His daughter very clearly has some mental issues that have never been fully addressed, but Stanley has also done his best, I think. That's even though the author maintains kind of a very cynical outlook on Stanley as a person, I think he even talks about the way that he loves his daughter and his wife. But you also see the way that Stanley unfortunately treats his brother, and it's not, he does not treat his brother in the best of ways. You also get the way that Stanley sees himself in terms of comic books, that even though this is something he's very successful at, he's constantly trying to do things that disassociate him from comics. And he's constantly trying to go to Hollywood to make movies and to make deals. And even in the last 20 to 30 years of his life, he kind of disassociates himself from Marvel to start a number of failed or business outlets for himself. One that has his own name in it, Stan Lee, and the other called POW Entertainment. And basically nothing has really come up that's been truly successful. Maybe a television show, maybe a character or two, but I don't think we can safely say that Stripperella has exactly been very successful as a character. So I think there are a lot of shades of gray in Stanley's life, but I think it's very clear to me that he is the type of person who was kind of in I don't want to say in denial, but he was very dissatisfied with his stature, because I think in his own mind maybe he wasn't being successful at something that was high art, because he was successful at being a comic book artist. And I think Vince McMahon kind of feels the same way, that his success has come in wrestling, and he's desperately tried to be successful in numerous other entertainment ventures. And Stanley's creations are on big movie screens, whereas even Vince McMahon, those his characters, I mean, The Rock is in movies, Batista's in movies, and John Cena's in movies, but WWE not in movies.
Yeah, that's kind of the parallels I was thinking too. And with Vince McMahon, it's just like, I'm sure, despite how much we criticize him as as wrestling fans and stuff, I'm sure he's done good things too. And there's no absolute evil, no absolute good. Like you said, with Stan Lee, I think he really tried to be a good person. So I don't think of him as like cynically as the author probably feels, because like it feels like at times he'll take these like little pot shots here and there about questioning things about his credibility and stuff, but the way he would kind of word it kind of, yeah, it seemed really cynical and pot shotty. You know what I mean? But I'm still gonna collect my Stan Lee pops. You know what I mean? I have a whole collection of Stan Lee Funko Pops that I've been growing since last year, and like I'm still looking for more because all those cameos that he did in all the Marvel movies and stuff, they put him in pop form, and I'm a pop guy, and it's really awesome to have. And I'm looking at him now, and all these different variations of Stan Lee, and it's interesting that he wanted to be loved by people and the fans, and it took about, I don't know, like 60 years, right, to get to the level where he's just like worldwidely known. So he finally got that at the end of his age. So I feel like maybe he kind of got some satisfaction towards the end, but his family life and all that stuff, especially with the daughter, and his daughter was really it. Reading the descriptions about his daughter and him having interactions really reminded me of the guests in my work because of the area that I live in or that I work in, and I've seen those situations with those type of people. So I can only imagine what Stanley's going through because some of these parents don't want to deal with their children who are adults that have these mental issues, and they just want to dump money in a hotel and just leave them there sometimes. And I've seen that. So this idea that he was trying to get his daughter help and stuff like that, I believe it. And like the fact that he couldn't get the right help, and the fact that she probably doesn't have the right help now to this day in her 60s or whatever, it's really sad. It's a sad ending, but like it's also, you learn from it. You know what I mean? Like you don't necessarily want to be like Stan and surround yourself with a bunch of people that'll just mooch till the day you die. You know what I mean? And that was the really interesting part of the book that I found fascinating. Just the last, yeah, from like 1980 on, because like, yeah, you're interested in the history of comics and stuff, but more of like the financial stuff that was going on, and like the lunacy of it all, and like liquidating one company into another company and completely losing ownership of what Stan created and whatnot, and then having a judge being so frustrated and confused. Shit like that is just amazing because it just feels like some of these people in Hollywood will prop themselves up, create these companies, say they're gonna, produce all this stuff, take a bunch of money in and produce nothing, which is pretty much what Stanley's companies did. I don't think he intended to do that. It's just the people around him just mooch like that. So it's really unfortunate, but I think there's a lot to learn, in terms of business, in terms of crediting your writers, stuff like that, and also making kind of peace at the end. Because I think it sounded like he made peace with at least Jack Kirby before Jack Kirby died in the mid '90s. It sounded like it. It seems like it, and I hope that is true because it's kind of funny. Jack Kirby leaves Marvel because of this, this whole Marvel process and him not getting credit. Goes to DC, creates Darkseid, gets shafted by DC, goes back to Marvel. It's interesting stuff with Jack Kirby, but with the timing of everything and the Snyder cut with Darkseid in it, it's just crazy timing for everything. But yeah, maybe we should focus on Jack Kirby on maybe something else next time, because we know a lot about Stan and I collect his pops and all, but I think Jack Kirby is another and Steve Ditko to that extent, because they're probably the top two Marvel artists from that era.
Well, I think it's not just artists, but it's also writing as well. And Jack Kirby had so much to do with a number of different concepts. Steve Ditko is basically associated with Spider-Man, and I think that's why he was so prominently featured, because Spider-Man is such an important character. When it comes to Jack Kirby, I would really like it if we could get a kind of a definitive biography, kind of in the same vein as this one, or a documentary. Another thing that this called to mind is the documentary on Bill Finger. Bill Finger is one of the co-creators of Batman, but he was never co-credited with the alleged solo creator Bob Kane. He was never fully credited until Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice, and that's the first time that Bill Finger's name has ever been given the credit that it deserves. There is a great documentary on Bill Finger that you can find on Hulu. Would strongly recommend everyone check that out. And I would like to get something like that with Jack Kirby as well, just to kind of get his perspective on things. But I think this is it's a really sad ending to his life, because here you have somebody who lost his wife and was basically still being forced to do autograph signings when he clearly didn't want to do that anymore. And I can't blame him. I mean, the man is 95 years old at this point, and it's really unfortunate. And I think that with Stan Lee, I think it really brings up the issue of caretaking in this country and issues of that sort. And I think it's something we probably should discuss more. Is just who is taking care of who and finances and all that stuff. And it sucks that we have to have these conversations, but just with how complicated these things are, it's something that we probably need to talk more about and have better plans for ourselves when we get old and incapacitated.
Yes, please, and please just don't leave him and dump him at a hotel and have the employees just fucking clean him up or take care of him or stuff like that. Because that's what hotel employees are not. We're not there for that. But in some cases, it ends up being that because of situations like this. Like seriously. So, but overall, like if I were to rate the book, I'd probably give it a 7.5 out of 10. Like I would probably grade it higher if it was cut down a little bit, but I did, enjoy it, and it was an audio book for me. But I'm used to podcast form anyway, so it was a fun enjoyment. Read, listen, whatever. But overall, I think there was some notes that I mentioned, or I wanted to note. Like Jason Mewes apparently got the final cameo of Stan Lee, but you caught that, right?
Yeah, I guess that is the official final cameo that was filmed. I don't know if that's the official last one that we see him in, because I know after his death we saw him in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I know Endgame for sure is his last cameo in a Marvel movie, but I don't know if that was filmed before the Jason Mewes one. Apparently not.
Yeah, I was just blown away that the words Jason Mewes appeared in this book. Like I would have never expected. Kevin Smith, yeah, he's mentioned quite often, but Jason Mewes, I was just shocked, and the fact that he's credited as a director. Wow, things have changed for that guy because Jason Mewes was in a really bad place like 10 years ago. So good for him. So he's credited with directing Stan Lee's last cameo. So good for him. And they also mentioned the RZA, or for like briefly mentioned the RZA with the Wu-Tang Clan. But I just wanted to mention that in the audiobook, the author goes, the RZA lost it, just completely lost it.
For sure. I would give this a 7 out of 10. I certainly think the first 100 pages are a bit of a slog, but once you get past that, and I would say, I know Brian mentioned 1980. I think once you get into the Marvel method, even in the 1960s, I think that's when the book really picks up. And I think the strongest part, it is sadly ironic to me, Brian, that one of the things that Marvel movies get criticized for is their third acts and kind of how weak they are. The strongest part of this book, mostly because of the level of reporting and the level of information and documentation that probably exists, the book's strongest act is the third one. And that is sadly ironic.
That's kind of what the book I think should have been like all about. Because like I said, there's other Stanley biographies, and he's citing them. So I would have just liked the book on this.
Well, I think part of it is that he's trying to counter some of the narratives that he himself has told. That I think part of his argument is that a lot of other Stanley biographies and autobiographies have not been accurate, and part of what he's trying to do is to not just set the record straight on what happened in his last few years, but also go back in time and try to set the record straight. And I think part of the issue with that is that it leads to a lack of focus in the first 100 pages, because he is not only trying to tell his life story but also trying to assert kind of what's true and what isn't.
Yeah, for sure, I get that. But yeah, because like when it opened up, it was just kind of like a weird biography of his family that was kind of written in a weird kind of prose. So, but yeah, I think one more bonus question I want to throw out for you. I was thinking about this. Stan Lee's movie. Who do you cast in it?
I almost think you have to cast somebody who's unknown. I think that would be my preference at this point. And I think trying to cast someone who is Stanley, you just don't have people like that in this world anymore. And because I think because Stanley he's kind of a huckster, he's kind of a used car salesman, but he's also got this Hugh Hefner quality to him as well. That is something that's very hard to manifest. Not to mention, he's got a lot of New York / New Jersey in him. His Jewish heritage plays a huge part. I almost think you have to cast somebody who's an unknown. I know that's a boring answer, but that's kind of where I land on it.
Yeah, it was tough me thinking about this because like I was thinking maybe like for fun like Tom Holland 20 years from now kind of thing because of the whole Marvel tie-in and everything, and he played Spider-Man, but because he's also that kind of right height too, because Stanley's kind of short, so you don't want to cast a tall guy into the role; it would just throw people off. So because then you get me complaining about Solo. But yeah, maybe Tom Holland in 20 years. So that's kind of my take on it, and hopefully they probably do an HBO miniseries would be better instead of a full 3 hour movie because there's a lot, man. There's a lot of history that they go over, and there's a lot of characters that he's gone through throughout his history. So, yeah, Stanley's had quite the life, and I'm still glad I collect his pops. And if anyone has the Hugh Hefner Iron Man 3 pop, let me know.
Certainly, you can do that. All right, Brian. So we have discussed the old guard. We've discussed the rise and fall of Stanley. So we originally had some other ideas for how we were going to approach the month of April. Those plans have changed, and perhaps in the future that's something I will discuss. But we are going to keep the ball rolling with the limited edition of Pantheon, and we are actually going to go. We're going to kind of go week to week, and again, that's something that I'll explain why in the future. But we are going to discuss Kick-Ass next week. We have not discussed a number of superhero movies, even though we have done a lot of them at this point. We have not done a few, and we are going to go back in time and review the first of two Kick-Ass movies. Not sure if we're going to do a full review of Kick-Ass 2 because that movie is an abomination, but we are going to review the first Kick-Ass, and it's very timely, both because Aaron Taylor Johnson is a part of the Godzilla franchise. Kick-Ass was also mentioned in the movie WandaVision because Evan Peters is in Kick-Ass with Aaron Taylor Johnson. So there's a lot going on there with both of them playing Quicksilver in two different Marvel franchises. We also get to talk about the wacky and wild Nicolas Cage, and we also get to talk about Chloe Moretz as well, as she has since gone on to become a pretty big deal herself.
Yeah, and she was in Tom and Jerry, which just released last month. So everything always kind of comes together with these things, right? Like Kick-Ass just kind of comes at the right time. And yeah, I'm excited because I remember watching it in the theaters, just being blown away by it. How it's kind of a modest, it's not a big budget, it's like a modest budget. And Matthew Vaughn, who would go on to do First Class right after this. After I saw this and then I heard he was doing the First Class, I knew First Class was going to kick ass, and I was right. So this is the movie that proved it, and I want more Matthew Vaughn. And um, yeah, I even like the Kingsman too, and I know people don't like Kingsman too, so there you go.
Well, we could talk about that another time. But for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast this week. We will talk to you again next week for Kick Ass.
Oh, a sailboat.